Hey, it's Stu, and this is a chilly November day weekend reading review of my first week of November's weekend reading. I finished 7 books since my last video, and 3 of them pertained to the Native American Heritage Month pile of possibilities. One was Booker, and yay, Booker was announced today for anyone who has been following. And no, I'm not going to go over any of that because I'm going to talk about the books I read. One was a Neurovember pick, and then 2 were fall vibes. Let me see. I listened to 2 of these. One was fully digital, and including the 2 that I listened to, I had the physical copy, so there was some kind of hybrid digital audio experience for 6 of them, and then 1 was just fully digital. So I will start with the 3 that were my picks, or in my pile of possibilities for Native American Heritage Month. The first was the much anticipated Empire of Wild by Cherie Dimaline. I very mistakenly thought that this was a young adult, and in fact it is not a young adult, and I wouldn't recommend it for young adult audiences per se. This book was fantastic, and really in that realm of mythology, fantasy. It used some sort of gothic horror mechanisms to tell the story of colonization, exploitation, and missing and endangered Indigenous women, really. In this story, we have a mythical creature called a Rougarou. The Rougarou is a wolf man, and there's the presence and the mythology of the Rougarou is throughout. It is then blended with Western sort of mythology around the werewolf, and even a little of folklore, blending in some Little Red Riding Hood concepts as well. What I really appreciated about this book is how it was very confronting to the way in which religion has been used as a mechanism of ethnocide and other evils of colonization. I don't think this book was without flaw, but who am I to necessarily bring out flaws in something that was outside of sort of what I normally read? And I found it to be literally a wild ride. I do have a friend that I'm going to give this book to, and this would be on I listened mostly to this book, so I would like to experience this book again, maybe with a different modality, such as reading it with my eyeballs exclusively, or more than listening, but or maybe just reread the book again and notice things that I didn't notice the first time. So it is going in on haul. I'm sticking pretty close to that, but I kind of have it as on my mental list of if I see it again coming back to me again in a year or so, I'll do it again. Or I do experience that people ask for recommendations for me and then want to do a buddy read, in which case I would check it out again at the library and buddy read it with someone. The next book that I also listened to, and I was really excited for the audio of this. I started it during the summer and just didn't get to, I wanted to kind of be able to listen in the headspace and the way in which I did end up listening to Tommy Orange's There. This again was a much anticipated read for me. I find it very interesting that the blurb on both of them is Margaret Atwood. Not just because of the acclaim and the multiple awards that There got. I had a lot of anticipation for There as a contemporary urban Native story. And what I really appreciated about this was Tommy Orange's, what I esteem as an amazing job of making sure that any reader that was paying attention and had an attention span enough to pay attention, that they were very clear that being Native is not a monolith. No identity is a monolith. It comes with multiple intersectionalities and multiple different kinds of experiences in life. He also did an excellent job of saying, you know, here's the story of the urban Native that isn't told. So the urban natives, right? Not the monolith. Here's some urban native story. And I also really appreciated how he anchored them in the prologue, which was the information about the mythology around Thanksgiving, and the massacre therein, and then also, you know, kind of tied it all back together with powwow in the end, so that to demonstrate that these stories don't even have to interweave that much, although I thought he did a pretty good job of interweaving them. That you, like, the act of you recognizing that there are multiple stories to be told is enough. If you read this book and said, yeah, now I'm able to recognize that that Native Americanism, the Native identity, is not a monolith, and there are many urban American, Native American stories to be contemplated, and I have had zero opportunity or very limited opportunity in all of the books that one reads to explore them. Thank you, Tommy Orange, for giving me the breadth that you did. I also very much appreciated how, and I do love it when authors really work the setting. And I thought that, I'm not from Oakland, and I've only been there like in passing through a few times in my life, but I myself, from that place of naivete, loved how he worked the setting of Oakland in this book. I once heard a reviewer say, oh, it was grotesque, and that's why she didn't like it. And I find everyone should be able to react to books the way that they do. Don't books also give us an opportunity to realize to question, why are we, there's so much in this. And if you can't, if you say, oh, I don't like multiple stories woven together, that's fine. You're not required to like it. But have you also stopped as a reader to think, why did the author make the choice of telling multiple stories, right? Some people wanted more depth. I would agree. I could read volume 2, volume 3, volume 4, or I could read an entire, Tommy, if you're listening to this, just pick, Opal and just tell her in-depth story for another novella, etc., etc. Yeah, this is another book. I'm going to let it go. It needs to be out there for other people to discover, and hopefully I can give it to someone who will appreciate some of the things that I just mentioned and see other things in it, to have a discussion with me, because I would very much like that. But if not, then I will let it go, but it hopefully will come back to me. This is a book that I would like to have. If I ever have a stagnant collection, this book would be in it. The Lost Journals of Sacagawea by Deborah Magpie Erling. Deborah, if you're listening to this, thank you. Thank you so much for what is this enormous work to really, really tell Sacagawea's story from Sacagawea's voice and perspective. I found it so hard to grapple with it because I have heard this story through dominant culture, through male, through colonist perspectives, and it was told in a way that made me really, really have to confront that the way in which even I digest stories has been formed by all of those things that I just said. And you weren't gonna let me as a reader be lazy with this at all. I had to do my work to be able to experience what you imagined. I'm still talking to Deborah, if you're wondering, as Sacagawea's story. It's feminist, it's brutal, it is grotesque, and guess what? Living in nature can be. And who sets the standards around what is pleasant? Like, I'm thinking about that too, like with this, that there is some use of grotesque mechanisms in all three of these books, and I find that confronting too. Maybe there's a cultural norm around being pleasant around things like effluvia and or body function that isn't, it's a cultural norm, it's not necessary, and especially to project onto other cultures. So I am also gonna let this go, sadly, because if I were building a collection, this would be in it. I was not entertained by this book the same way that I was entertained by these two. This was not an easy read for me. It was difficult for multiple reasons. And I am so I can't be any more grateful to have the opportunity that this book has been written. So again, thank you again, Deborah Magpie Erlang, and Millweed, the Millweed Press, for getting this out, and that I was able to find it and read it. So now on to Booker and what could be, okay, it was an entertaining and intriguing reading experience because of Roddy Doyle's ability and craft in writing. This book had no chapters, and I also just really appreciate, like, books don't need to be paced through chapters. You can kind of make it the one long day of childhood, right? This is what I told a friend, and this is what I mean about this book. If you like to explore books about young homophobic males obsessed with violence and male genitalia, romping around, being racist, sexist, and homophobic all the day long, while also trying to make sense of the patriarchal world around them, through their, well, it's very particularly through this one young male's eyes, then this is the book for you. If you've had just a bit too much of that kind of thing, because it's been around and around and around, then yeah, maybe not. I mean, maybe a good partner read is this, and then Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell, to see the consequences of maybe the world in which the violence and cruelty and all of the other isms I've just explained of this boy, what that results in as an adult person. I don't regret having read this book. I do appreciate Roddy Doyle's craft, and I don't mind having a piece of literature with which to draw the criticisms that I just had. I suppose if I were being more discerning, right, I would just maybe really limit myself books where the authors have no female characters at all and aren't exploring any new kind of vulnerability and or way in which to explain the male experience. But that, once I was kind of realizing what was going on, I was also, blinded by my own bias that, oh, here's a story about boys being boys. Trigger. Anyway, the next book was for Neurovember, and it was a book that I understood via some reviews or little bits that I look up online, and I don't do much, to maybe perhaps have a neurodivergent character, the main character. This is The Maid by Nita Prose, and it was my mystery prompt option. It had been on my shelf for quite a while. It was something that I thought would be a bit cozy, and indeed it was. There is no diagnosis in this book, so the reader is kind of left to diagnose the character, which also felt a little icky for me. I can make some inferences without diagnosis as not being a professional diagnostic, someone who has any professional capability of making diagnoses. I want to be very, very, very careful not to diagnose people with anything. It's not what I have any background or scholarship in doing, or expertise. That being said, I definitely think there was a lot of alluding to, and maybe even therefore use of, the stereotypes of particularly autism, through the understanding of sort of like this social awkwardism as self-reported by the main character, who's the maid. I think her name is Molly. Yeah, Molly. And there were some times when I was quite endeared to this character, but also sometimes when I thought that it was written quite infantile, and then other times quite conniving, and that didn't seem consistent to me. It didn't feel consistent. And I especially think that Nita Prose's choice to write in the first person, maybe because I think that was to develop the twists in this plot. And I problematize it because it then in order to develop twists, what are we saying about the inner workings of a mind of this character? Second, there was a scene in which she had a love interest and he clearly wasn't interested in her. And like in Patty Clark, ha ha ha, there were scenes, because he's young, when he has a child's view of the world, and as an adult reader, I knew I could infer what was going on in a situation more than that child could, and that was Roddy Doyle's intention. There are moments when I believe also Nita Prose in this book wants you to, you infer that this gentleman's not into Molly. But she's not getting the cues. And I think it's written to be humorous, which ironically, even in the book, she says, you're laughing with me, not at me, right? Like, it made me feel like that humor was that humor was created through this character not understanding that this other person didn't like her. And that was also kind of developed through this I'm socially awkward, therefore I don't get social cues kind of paradigm. And in fact, I've met plenty of people who thought that somebody might be into them and have sort of vibed wrong. And I think that that's awkward, and it's really difficult to work through as the one who has feelings, and then the other person doesn't have feeling towards you. So I felt it, for me as a reader, a little voyeuristic reading a scene where I know that who she's interested in is not interested in her. I didn't even think it was necessary for the plot, to be honest. I think this book was fine. I wouldn't read another of this series, or even maybe another book by Nita Prose, but I think a lot of people like this book. So if you like cozy and a little bit quirky, and you're not over here thinking like I am over too much, like what are we trying to say about characters with inference of social awkwardness into neurodivergence or something, because I put myself in that paradigm by picking it for that reason, then I could see a lot of people finding this book endearing and somewhat entertaining. Like I said, it was fine. That's what I'm going to give it, fine. And I won't read anything else likely by this author, or certainly not in this series. The next book I'm going to talk about is S.A. Cosby's Razorblade Tears, which was not cozy at all. Think just like Quentin Tarantino, like male violence, and that sort of like real toxic masculinity type violence, which also then confronts the consequences of it, as we have two characters who are the fathers of two men who are married who never accepted the queerness of their sons, and the sons are murdered, and the two fathers then want atonement and revenge. So they have like double sort of like biblical style motivations to do a scorched earth campaign against criminal gangs and Mr. Biggs. And so it's definitely all about that. I think that if you are a thriller and you have a high tolerance for violence and you kind of are entertained by sort of that criminal world, solve problems by violence situation, and also want to use, like, are interested in the exploration of identity and, you know, is it too late? Although this is about atonement and revenge, like, it's like these two characters are confronted all of the time. Like, their sons are gone. They didn't respect them when they were alive. Yeah, I think it was a good read. It was, for me, a little too violent, and I appreciated, for instance, reading, I think it was right after this, where violence as a worldview is understood and narrated so differently. I mean, it's a reality, but it's narrated so differently, and the consequences therein. And I would say even there's a lot of violence as a gang sort of situations as a worldview that also doesn't, it's narrated differently than sort of the, I'm going to say, glorification that Razorblade Tears did. So it was kind of interesting to see that thread throughout and look at it through all of the different perspectives. And that's why I like doing these long form videos to talk about how books relate to one another and how what I read before and after definitely influences my experience with a book. The final one was Fall Vibes, and that's Take My Hand by Dolene Perkins Valdez. And this is historical fiction, and it's a heavy topic and about the forced sterilization of young girls, in this case in Alabama. And this nurse's quest and mission to blow the whistle and evoke change, awareness, and then change around that, as reproductive health and reproductive justice is still a very pertinent issue. This is salient in contemporary times. What I liked about how Dolene Perkins Valdez wrote this book is it's incredibly accessible to almost all readers. It moves quickly between two timelines, and so the pacing is short chapters. A lot of plot and a lot of characters, but it's not dense in any way, so that you really get the story, the narrative of what happened, so you can be aware of that history and the Tuskegee Project history as well, in case you haven't been aware, or if you have been aware and you're like, where is this in the books? So I appreciate that. There were several times when Dolene sort of ended a chapter with a bit of a like cliffhanger and then didn't tie up the loose ends for me, and I did find it a little distracting. I don't want to be overcritical. Again, there's such a purpose for this book being out there, and not all books have to be like, the winner or finalist for a Pulitzer, if you use that pride for any kind of that prize for to mean anything such as meritocracy, or complexity of literary fiction. And I think this is more genre fiction, commercial fiction, and I do appreciate that choice to get this story out there. And yeah, I was just a little bit distracted by the little bits of loose ends that weren't completely tied up. But again, it was a book of the month, so it gained some kind of popularity through that book club, and I am more than happy. I know exactly which Little Free Library that I think is that has these kinds of books and maybe an audience for these books. So I'm excited to get that out into the little free library. I have also recommended it to a friend in audio. I actually did a little bit of audio, not much in this, because I was into it, and it was, you know, gripping, meaning it was the kind of story you could just kind of stay in. You didn't have to stop and think too much about. And so I switched to the audio for this instead of continuing to listen to Empire Wild for my evening walk, which I'm about to go on. And I really liked the audio. I just got so into it in the physical and digital that I didn't want to make the full switch to audio. So I recommended the audio to an audiobook listener who I think would also just appreciate the kind of commercialized fiction access to this historical, to this history. That's what I want to say. So that's it. My first week of November in reading, and I am already underway as it's Monday evening into my next week's TBR. So you'll hear about that in the next review video.